Dr. Maxwell is the Division Chief of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the Una Davis Family Chair in Behavioral Health at Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego. He's also an assistant professor at UC San Diego School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. His interests are in general clinical care, education, mental health integration into primary care settings, and global mental health. He has collaborated with clinical programs in India, Spain, Ethiopia, and Guatemala, and has presented on a wide range of mental health topics. Dr. Maxwell received his medical degree from the University of Texas in 2007, completed a general psychiatry residency at the University of California, Irvine in 2010, and completed a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at UC San Diego in 2012. He has volunteered for numerous initiatives and programs both in the United States and abroad, including the Ethiopian School of Readiness Initiative, Addis Ababa University, I know I'm going to mess that word up. Say it.
You've said it.
Yeah, say the word. Yakatit 12 Hospital, Amarbieta Pediatrics Clinic in Spain, and the Homes Clinic for the Homeless in Houston. All right. Sure. Okay. Liz and I, Ms. Gerson and I met with Dr. Maxwell over Zoom in 2024, and when we were preparing to administer the Mental Health Questionnaire from last year, which was the MHQ survey, if you recall, if you were here. It's a global survey that we did in December 2024. The survey was developed by Sapien Labs as part of a School for Strong Minds initiative. The MHQ was a snapshot of a person's self-perception along with various dimensions of mental health functions used to determine your mental well-being. It's not a measure of happiness or life satisfaction, but it did provide some really useful and insightful data for Pacific Ridge School to understand the mental health landscape for our students, and particularly its intersection with use of devices and social media. Dr. Maxwell will speak today about the MHQ results and about the state of teen and mental health today. So please, welcome, Dr. Maxwell.
Is it okay if I just try to project my voice? This is working okay. So I've never run a middle school and high school to know how to use schools as a positive. I've never raised a teenager successfully. I was a second grader. I just dropped out of school. So you might be saying, well, why in the world are you here to talk to us about how we can do better here at Pacific Ridge? And I'm not here to do that. I have just as many questions as you all have. I think there was an idea of this is a conversation. And so I think that's the intent of me being here, is to start that conversation. I have just as many questions as I might have answers. So you might either want to walk out now, or you might say, well, why are you here? So I've been a child psychiatrist here in San Diego since 2010. When I started, I was mentioning this on my walk-in. Kids' mental health wasn't something that was in the news every day. It was something that had been stable for decades. Things have mainly been the same with our kids' mental health. In fact, probably around 2007, our kids' mental health was about as good as it had ever been in the history of our country, in the history of us recording this data. You might know that's changed a lot. At Rady Children's Hospital, when I started in 2010, we saw 167 kids in psychiatric crisis in our emergency room. That main emergency room in Kearny Mesa, 167 all year. Last fiscal year, we saw over 4,700. That's a 28 times different, 2,800% increase in a little over 15 years. So that's pushed us to say, well, what do we do about this? So we partnered with a lot of philanthropic people and foundations to open a psychiatric emergency department, a behavioral urgent care. We've started to embed in primary care clinics across the region. And all of that is great, but it has not turned the tide on this crisis. And so the reason I'm here is the realization that I've had is clinics alone can't solve this problem. There has to be collaboration between major healthcare systems, schools, and other sort of levers of social change and things that can support families and kids to thrive emotionally. I met folks related to Sapien Labs probably about 4 years ago. And when I first started talking to them, they were just looking at global mental health data for adults and kids and everything. They didn't know what they would find. And over the course of them looking at that data and us working together on a few papers, it became pretty clear that the thing that was changing the most was young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, and what was happening in childhood. The 50-up crowd was about the same as they've always been. They've been doing quite well. What they found is this thing that is typically called the U-shaped curve of psychological well-being. Some of you may have seen this, where 18 to 24 years old, historically, you're at college, making friends, finding your identity, having a bunch of fun, and you'd ask these people, 18 to 24 years old, remember when you were that age? It was great, right? And then you got out of college, you got a job, it got a little worse. And then you got married and had a couple of kids, and you had a mortgage or something, and maybe got a little worse again. And typically in your 40s and 50s, middle age was like the bottom of the psychological well-being, right? I don't know. So you're at the bottom, right? And then you have self-realization, and then your kids go off and they're successful, and you worry less about them, and you're not as financially stressed as maybe you are in your earlier adulthood. And it gets better and better. And that's one of those things that's said. I think Jane Fonda did that TED Talk about how older years are actually some of the best years of your life. So that's what it was in the past. What does it look like now? Well, now it's a straight line. 18 to 24-year-olds are doing the worst, and it gets a little better as you go up. Now, that was an interesting enough finding that Sapien Labs and I were looking at. We said, well, if we have all this data, now we are compelled to do something about it. And so what are we going to do about it? Well, the target population for some intervention needs to be kids, because that's the thing that's going to change this trajectory and improve our mental health as much as we possibly can. They're also doing research with the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the world's last hunter-gatherer societies. And we asked the question, gee, I wonder what their MHQ score would be. These are people that have been living the same way that people have been living for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years. And when we did it, their line was a straight line, and it was up at the top. And so it was just, you know, they were socially connected, they had purpose, they had meaning, they slept well, they ate the same thing for years. And so we feel like there's something there, that what's happening is our societies are putting people in an environment that's causing them amounts of stress that they're just not capable of managing. Wow, what do you do with that if you're in a clinic and you're a child psychiatrist? It's very, very difficult to change some of those realities. Same if you're a school. So the underpinnings of psychological well-being are the things we started to look at, and we want to find ways that we can try to improve that in some way through either schools, clinics, on-the-ground programs, things like YMCA or after-school programs, and also infuse these things into the environments and stories that kids are being told, whether on the phone or in movies or sitcoms. So we're trying to bring these things together in a movement, frankly, where we actually change this and we create a next generation that can thrive psychologically. You might say, well, what are we looking for? Like, are we trying to have all of our kids be happy? Or are we trying to make them not have a mental health disorder? What is the thing we're trying to achieve? And the Sapien Labs team and me and some other people have talked about that quite a bit. And what we've determined and what the MHQ is based on is the idea of psychological well-being as defined by the World Health Organization. And what they define that is able to deal with the stress of day-to-day life and be a productive member of your community, family, and society, right? So how can we achieve that? We're not saying every day is going to be jump for joy, happy. We are saying that we want our kids to be able to deal with stress and manage that. And some of that is infused into this MHQ that some of the kids took here, I think, about a year ago. So that's just sort of a level set of, like, why are we here? And I don't have the answer, but I think there are answers that can be found through collaboration with schools like you all and data people like this, and how do we find it. So I don't know exactly the slide, so we'll just kind of go through it and see what happens. So this is about a year ago. I was talking to the Sapien Labs people last week about this talk and asking them some questions, and they're really interesting because they can get data quickly. So unlike most academic papers that are like, the data is 4 years old by the time it gets published, they can pump these out pretty quickly. They actually thought this data is a year old is old. I think it's still relevant, pretty new, frankly. And so you see these numbers on here, and you can say, well, what does that mean? So the school mind health score is 77. That's down in the bottom left corner. That is about 50 points higher than the average in the United States. So the school's doing very, very, very well. But you can see there's still kids that are struggling. About 20% of kids are distressed or struggling, and that means their psychological well. Yep.
Can you just give the background on what the sample was?
Yeah, that's I think on this next slide here. So it's a total of 494 kids took this. It looks like about 50 to 70 or 80 per grade. It looks like a relatively well-matched male to female. And something like 10 to 20% of the kids per grade. So with that being said, it's probably a reasonable sample. You might say there's a selection bias, who takes it, who doesn't. But that's a pretty typical sample of the other schools that Sapien Labs has done. So again, doing very, very well. 50%-ish are thriving. And you have very high adaptability, resilience, and a thing that is seen basically in every teenager. These domains of social self and mood and outlook are the ones that are lowest. And that's across the board, both in the United States and globally for the Sapien Labs data. And they've done this in over 2 million people in, I think, 70 different countries and 20 different languages. So it's a very, very large data set. So this is typical and much better than most of the country. Yeah.
Do you publish what the questions are?
Yeah, you can go online to the MHQ, Sapien Labs MHQ, and anybody can take it for free anytime.
Okay.
And you get your own
It'll be the same
report.
test the kids took.
It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty dang close. There's some that are more geared towards kids, and the one online, I believe, is still the adult version that's for 18 and up. So it might say something like something about your job, as
Right.
opposed to something about school.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is the outlook like an optimism metric, basically?
Exactly, yeah. So mood and outlook is some of the questions about your mood and what are your expectations for the future. So you can imagine, we all live in this world. Kids and adults are being bombarded with, if it bleeds, it leads, and in our pocket we carry the weight of all the world's problems if we look at those things too much. And certainly kids look at that stuff a lot. And social self is, as you probably heard, social disconnection, loneliness, people having friends, kids having friends. That's really disintegrated, frankly, between the 1970s and now. It's been going in that direction where more and more kids are lonely, more and more adults are lonely, our society is less trustworthy of each other. And these things are all things that our mind really relies on. We've always relied on community and connection to solve problems together, and a lot of people feel more and more isolated, including kids. So this is a busy slide, but we can go through some of these and maybe go through some of the ones that provide the greatest opportunity for change, specifically for the data we're looking at today. And this is, again, pretty typical. I'd start with the bottom one of promoting sleep hours. And some of you may have heard of Jean Twenge, who is also here in San Diego County, and it's probably really interesting for us to come talk as well. She's looked at this generation, what are some of the underpinnings of the youth mental health crisis. And one of the most underappreciated things is that kids are sleeping less and their sleep quality is less. And some of that's likely because they're on screens in their room or, even doing homework online, and that blue light entering their eyes and disrupting circadian rhythms. But certainly kids' sleep has gotten worse over the past decade, and it appears to be tied to the worse off your sleep is, the more likely you are to have anxiety, depression, or even self-harm, suicidal thoughts. So that's one thing just to throw out there from the get-go is that's a very, very clear thing. And as a parent, optimizing your kids' sleep and considering their sleep hygiene to ensure that they're getting, the 8 to 9 hours of sleep and sort of seeing how they do with different amounts of sleep is really important. Kids also have, especially teenagers, have this thing called delayed sleep phase syndrome, which means they typically want to stay up later and get up later. I don't know, anything like that. I wish my daughter had delayed sleep phase. She's so upset. Well, I'm ready for it. So, looking at that, I think is really important. I wanted to get that sort of out there right from the start. And that goes to, when is the kid doing homework? What does that homework look like? Are they able to have some period of relaxation before getting in bed? How do we make sure they don't need to wake up at 4 in the morning? How do we sort of throttle those things in the right way in order to ensure that they're getting the sleep they need? So that's a really important one, underappreciated. Go ahead.
Sorry, what is PRS?
Excellent. Yeah, so it's a good segue to, I think, the next underappreciated thing that we found with Sapien Labs and this big data approach is ultra-processed foods are clearly linked to psychological struggling on their data set. So the more often you're eating ultra-processed foods, the more likely you are to be psychologically struggling. And that's independent of exercise or some of the other preventative factors. So we don't know exactly why that is. There's a few ideas, and some of these things we're studying at Rady. One is ultra-processed foods can disrupt the microbiome, and likely the microbiome plays a role in maintaining our psychological well-being. So that's one possible way. The other is ultra-processed foods are engineered for addiction, right? It's the perfect amount of crunch, the perfect amount of salt, the perfect amount of all these things to make you want to eat more, and that can mess with your risk-reward systems in your brain, and potentially that changes the way we think about the world in a way that impacts our mood, outlook, and other sorts of domains. So those are two, I think, that are, again, underappreciated. And in the world we live in today, how can you keep your kid away from ultra-processed foods at all times? It's very, very, very difficult, right? So I wouldn't say that we need to go from 0 to 60, but thinking about these things of how do you, instead of having an Oreo cookie, have grandma's recipe and have that be the cookie your kid eats, because that has, flour, butter, chocolate chips, some other things, sugar. Sugar is not inherently bad, but some of the sugars in processed food, you get 200 different ingredients in food. We just frankly don't know what that's doing to kids' brains at this point. So, okay, we're good on those two that are probably underappreciated, but are out there.
Question on this one?
Yes.
I'm surprised to see the fourth one from the bottom, because the shorter the line, the less impact on the mind health, right?
Yeah.
So friendship, is that how that one?
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the examples of how this school is really doing quite well. And I think from a social perspective, this data is very, very good. That it appears that most kids feel like they have friendships and they have connection. So I think that aspect of this data is a reason for this community to celebrate. You do see at the top, there's a different sort of thing, which is also social connection and meaning, which is fostering a greater sense of belonging. Man, that is like, how do you do it? Like, I'd love to write a prescription and know that if you implemented it, it would work. The reality is I don't have that answer, and probably nobody in this room has the exact answer of how to do that. But it's a question that as a community, we can continue to think about, try to find solutions to. There's a boarding school. Well, I need to back up a little bit. We had Sapien Labs out to San Diego about 2 years ago, and we hosted them at Rancho Valencia, where I saw you the other night. And we had 8-person boardroom, and we were looking at the big data set. I broke that.
I'm sorry.
So we're looking at this big data set, and we see that it's mainly kids that we need to influence. And we were thinking about how do we actually do that? And we thought, well, we need to run a pilot project. So we were thinking of ideas of how to do that. And what we came up with was using a boarding school where we could influence what's happening in the boarding school and see what happens and change it. And so we found a boarding school in India that was willing to do a pre-test MHQ, make some changes with how they're running the boarding school, and do a post-test. And some of that data just came out. And they went from, remember that MHQ score of 70-something that this school had? They were about the same. We made a few interventions and they went to 102, I think, in something like 6-month period of time. And it was really looking at these exact things: community connection, belonging, having an adult you trust, minimizing ultra-processed foods that were in the cafeteria, and minimizing phone usage during school hours and after 8 p.m. to maximize sleep time. And all those things improved, and then the kids' outlook and social self all also improved. The other place we thought, well, where could you do this in sort of a pilot project? And that was summer camps. And so we found a summer camp in Maine that had 6 weeks of out in nature, being with people, healthy diet, no phones. And I mean, guess what happened? Like, kind of bad when they came in, and then after 6 weeks, they're all like kind of back to normal. And so we do think this isn't like a hopeless endeavor. We think the solutions are out there, and if we implement them in a way that kids can adopt, then we really can make a change. And so this is, a conversation. I won't pretend to know all the things that are on school administrators' plates and what they have to do. It's a very, very complicated job. I won't pretend to know how teachers might be able to do this. One of the things in there is build teacher trust. I can imagine going to all the teachers and saying, hey, let's just put one more thing on your plate, make sure all your students trust you. That probably is not going to fly. I mean, teachers have a lot on their plate as it is. Yeah.
On that, I have a question about that building teacher trust. So I'm assuming there was some kind of a question on that questionnaire around.
Do you have a teacher that you trust?
Do you have teacher trust, or on what scale of teacher trust do you have? And I don't know, that just is surprising to me that came up on the top of the list. That was one of just my comments / questions. And then
Issue. How about just the computer, just general computer, or is there something about the phone that's like the being with friends, texting, things like that, that's causing more of a ADD type of switching in your mind? Is there something more specific about the phone?
Yeah, I think there's probably levels of bad. I probably think the worst bad is having it constantly accessible in your pocket 24 hours a day, where potentially you have weird socialization things happening with your peers, and you, instead of having it just in history class, you have 24 hours a day, or the constant sort of noise that can come in through that. I think a laptop is better if it's not being carried around all the time. You're not sitting in front of it 8 hours a day. I mean, quickly, the thing kids are spending most of their attention span on is YouTube, which, I mean, that's something that's shifting, where more and more time is going towards YouTube. Less and less time, and you guys are correct me if I'm wrong on this, but less and less time are kids actually posting stuff. Yeah, back like 5 or 6 years ago, we were really concerned mainly about girls posting lots and lots of things online. Now there's like more of an observer of social media. So like TikTok is, you're not looking at what your friends are doing, you're looking at this endless scroll of things that are just happening in the world. So there's a shift there. There's a shift with boys are, and you see this in your data as well, boys are more likely to sort of be addicted to games like Fortnite and spend massive amounts of time there and really struggle getting out of that world. And they're less drawn into the social media world than girls are. So yeah, I think
And I've also heard that just having your phone in your pocket for any age causes a certain amount of anxiety or distraction. You're not able to think straight.
Absolutely.
Even just having it indoors, in a bag or whatever, that you kind of know it's there.
Yeah, there's like if you put it on the table versus having it in your pocket is even different. And so having, all of these things are potentially problematic depending on how they're used. And we also know, I don't know how you guys do all the academics here, but we know that kids learn better if they're writing something on paper than if they're typing something out. The tactile nature of things allows people to learn better. There's an interesting New York Times op-ed by a professor at some college for 30, 40 years, and he said you can't bring laptops and you can't bring phones into the classroom anymore. He was forcing them to listen and then write notes, and so you had to think to put it down, as opposed to like a lot of college students now that turn on some AI recorder and have it summarized, and they don't have to think, so they're not remembering it the same way. And so I think there's something to be learned there. How do kids learn the best? It's great to have technology, but sometimes it's not as helpful as people. So girls, worse than boys, but there's a little caveat there. You see this like risk areas for female students. They're not gamers apparently. But eating breakfast, that's an interesting one. Frequency of social media posting, that's up there. Belonging, we're not surprised by that. Sports teams, one of the clear things of data is like participation in athletics, exercise, and team camaraderie around that, and learning skills and finding mastery over those skills. Super, super protective to your psychological well-being. Socializing with friends outside of school, again, goes to the idea that there is good friendship and community within the kids at the school. So we kind of said all that already. Posting on social media, again, girls a little bit more than boys. Frequent posting is in the 10% range. Again, if you looked at this data 5 or 6 years ago, I bet it would have been a lot different. I think kids are posting less and just scrolling a lot more. But I think I heard something like average kid scrolls something like 100 yards per day. Just imagine that, Video games, again, boys way more than girls. Hours spent on homework. I don't know, this seems pretty reasonable, maybe expected. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's, I can't compare to other schools, but we do try to keep an eye on that. I think the 4 hours plus is a lot, obviously. And we know that our AP students are definitely doing more, right, in our 12th grade class.
Yeah, if you have 7% at 4 hours plus, that seems pretty good. Obviously the students that are in that bucket should probably figure out what's happening there, but if you're saying 30 minutes to 3 hours, I don't know, I'd say that seems pretty reasonable. I don't know, do people agree with that? Seems fine. So that seems like you guys are doing really well there. I don't know if there's anything really to change. Sapien Labs,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing that we do is when there's a school break of 4 days or more, there's no homework whatsoever, so that students can really retreat a little bit and do the things that make them happy and connected.
That's incredible. They've looked at data, or this is national data. Do kids do more homework now than they did in the past? And the answer is no. There's no data to support that that's increased or that school expectations have dramatically increased. So the things that have dramatically changed are this social fabric, social connection, belonging, trusting an adult in your school, friendship, not necessarily here at the school, but lots and lots of kids have if you ask the question, how many people know you well, many kids say zero people. So I think those are some of the main points. There's, I think, 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we can have more discussion on this and people can weigh in.
I'm just going to have you pop backwards and show the slide backwards. Yep. So the 7th grade, if you look at the 7th grade gaming hours,
Yeah.
and then go to the next slide.
back one?
The homework one that you were just on, and then you can see. That was very interesting. That's what's happening.
That's like, there wasn't a habit work. What is it about the 7th and 10th grade where it like peaks up? Why is it those two grades that it goes up?
I have a theory for 7th grade at least. I think that the 7th grade is like the age when oftentimes they do get a little, parents like are a little tighter with the restrictions and control and treating kids like elementary school students in 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, they're like, okay, well, you're like getting older. And so they open up a little bit more independence and try to like be a little bit more hands-off in 7th grade. And so I think that's my guess as to why we see that. It'd be super interesting to see like how that would have played out over the year, because this was done like kind of mid-year in December. And I'm wondering if like, because we see a shift in 8th grade where they're like, okay, like I've kind of got a little crazy and now I gotta like reel it in, or are parents reining it in? And I wonder if something similar, maybe as you can speak to, it happens in 10th grade where they're like, well, it's high school, I gotta get serious and like get focused, and then like 10th grade, they're like, I got this wired. I don't know, that's my theory.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is unfounded theory, but 10th graders, they're both silly and serious, and so they're pushed and pulled in, kind of, towards a middle school self, but they also have 11th and 12th grade on the horizon. And everyone is different, of course, and some may be engaging in more serious behaviors. And so I just think it's a liminal time a little bit in terms of development. And then when they hit 11th grade, it'd be interesting, well, it does go down.
Yeah, it did. So I thought it was interesting that it was like 7th and 10th. So it's like the year after you start middle school, and then the second year after you started high school, both of them like traject up and then go down.
Well, and that's where if there's serial data sets that can be looked at, then you can really start to look at, well, what does happen to this group when they're 11th grade? Mm-hmm. Does it actually go down, or does it stay high? If they were high at 10th grade, and then they're high at 11th grade.
Yeah, that's one example.
Yeah, it's just, so I think at this stage, caution against any like major conclusions being drawn from this data and saying, hey, it's 40 kids per grade that we looked at, and yeah, it gives us an idea of trends. But I wouldn't say, okay, we got an emergent thing in 10th grade, let's have an anti-gaming campaign.
One of the things I noticed, I don't know if you could go back to the overall one, if you add up, right there, if you add up the eating lunch plus eating breakfast, eating becomes the #1 risk factor for girls. And I'm curious, we talked about having special knowledge, unfortunately, about this, but is this specific to all girls right now? Is it focused very heavily in San Diego because of the focus on body image? Like, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, nationally, eating disorders have skyrocketed, and it really took a major turn in the pandemic. A lot of things were exacerbated during that period of time. This is just so common. We used to, in 2010, I remember, psychiatrists we trained, and we were never even trained to ask people, teenagers, about their eating patterns or their body image. And then I was the first psychiatrist at Rady Children's in their eating disorder unit, and all I saw was eating disorder patients for 2 years straight. And so then I took that, and I went back to those same clinics, and I started asking all those same girls, and lo and behold, like almost every teenage girl had some element that was being missed previously. And you can see that here in this data. Skipping meals, body image is something that clearly is distorted in a lot of teenage girls. This is likely due to some of the impact of social media that we brought up before. There's a lot of toxic junk on there, especially for girls, about that. In San Diego, and our community, frankly, is probably one of the most risky in the country. And there's a lot of healthy kids out there, but it's like the difference between healthy and unhealthy gets really tight. You can be exercising, running cross country, you're doing ballet, and all of a sudden you've kind of entered into a new world. And it's a tragic thing. It's something that needs to be like considered, whether you're the parent or the school, how are you making sure that kids are thinking about this and accessing it before they get too deep? Yes?
Has the data shown an increase in eating disorders in boys too?
There has been an overall increase. It's about 10% of the eating disorder patients that, at least that we see at Rady Children's are boys. 1 out of 10. So it's still predominantly girls, but it has increased quite a bit. The other thing, just real quickly, and I'll get to your question of like, people talk about youth mental health crisis a lot, and we don't necessarily always define it. There's a lot of things within mental health, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism, all these different things. The thing that's changed is anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts and eating disorders. ADHD has gone up a little bit as well. But the thing that's causing the crisis, so to speak, is the number of kids that are anxious and depressed and don't have hope for their future. Schizophrenia is about the same as it's always been. Bipolar is about the same as it's always been. Autism is diagnosed more probably because just expansion of diagnostic criteria and the way we identify it. And advanced maternal and paternal age is probably playing a role in the genetics of that. But the thing that's changing is these things that actually are preventable. So we can do a better job of raising kids that are able to sort of deal with the stresses of the modern world. And we actually know what to do to do that. It's how you implement them in the world we live in is the biggest question and conundrum. And that's, again, why I'm here. We can take more questions, but why I'm here is a hospital can't do it by themselves. A school can't do it by themselves. An individual family can't do it by themselves. The only way we will be able to solve this is through collaboration. So, yes.
So, my question is to you as a parent. Your daughter's in 2nd grade, so she's going to turn 7 this year.
She's 8.
She's 8,
She's
okay.
like an old second
So
grader.
she is the age the kids start asking for phones right now.
Yeah.
When are you going to give her a phone, and when are you going to give her social media?
Oh, I mean, my daughter, if I'm being honest, I keep in a little bubble. And that's a problem. So she watches TV maybe an hour a week, and she's outside a lot, and we just do a lot together. My wife is a stay-at-home mom, which is a luxury that affords us to have a lot of activities and sort of organize a lot of stuff, and we spend a bunch of our time because of the, frankly, tragedy I've seen in my career, and not wanting that to happen is the thing I love most, So I probably won't give her a phone ever, if you will. My hope is there's like a technological advancement that like smartphones are like cassette players or something like that. And we're all like, oh, we had smartphones? That there's a technological advancement that allows us to have a technology that influences our lives in a way that makes us more productive but doesn't sap all of our attention. That's sort of pie in the sky thinking. I mean, we live in an attention economy where so much money is on the table to be made based on getting kids' attention.
Right.
So my better answer to that is I definitely am trying to influence my community, the people I hang out with, to say, let's all give our kids a phone at the same time and let's talk about that. It's definitely not now. Maybe it's 8th grade, maybe it's 10th grade. And she won't have access to social media because I'm going to try to continue to advocate for laws against kids having access to social media until they're at least 16. And it should be later than that, in my opinion, but at least 16. And that's some of the predatory practices that social media companies use that hopefully can be regulated in a more positive way. Because it's not going to work out good for anybody. In the end, like, we need an economy that thrives, and we need innovation, and we need all these things to happen, and technology can be a part of that, but we can't, destroy the underpinnings of our society just for profit for some of these large. Yes.
On that same day, you mentioned earlier that there is some data essentially that children who have good help from social media also showing some look at it. I might be the only parent with a 9th grader with no phone yet.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Is it where am I doing some damage? Because I kept him from that world everyone he knows on the phone has for years.
Well, there's a group of college students that I work with that are sort of like how to get young people involved in this. And a bunch of those kids in that group are kids that didn't have phones, and they said, my social life was fine. And in fact, my social life was better because I was more willing to reach out, and I actually hung out with people in person. And a lot of kids don't like being off their phone. I mean, that's, I think, another like problem is the way we perceive this is like kids want to be on social media. Most kids know that it's causing them some difficulties, but it's their soccer practice is arranged through Instagram or their schoolwork's on there, and they don't really have any other way but to have a smartphone because that's how people communicate with them. So if we can find other mechanisms to do that, that'd be key. So are you causing problems? I think the things I've seen, kids that haven't been in this space, some go off to college, get a phone, and are more susceptible to scams. So that's something that we have to worry about, like all the scams that are out on the internet that people do. How do we prepare kids for that environment? It's very, very, very difficult. And then also just it's like a candy shop. Once they do get it, do they go too far? So I think you're probably doing the right thing if you're asking some of these questions and having that conversation with your son. But again, I don't have the answer. I've never raised a teenager. Your question, I have no idea. I hope I did the right thing. And it's what I started with. Like, I'm a child psychiatrist and I have all these fancy titles and whatnot. I can't solve this by myself. I can't solve the parents that come into the clinics. We're all part of the problem, and we all have to somehow find a way to be a part of the solution. Yes.